Hello, everyone. I'm Olga Mayorova, Director of the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies. Before introducing today's speaker, I have several announcements of upcoming events. On October 29, the WISE Center for Emerging Democracies and Greece are co-sponsoring a lecture by Milada Vachulova, Associate Professor of Political Science, University of North Carolina. Her lecture is entitled EU Leverage and National Interests in the Balkans, the Puzzles of Enlargement 10 Years On. On November 1st and 2nd, the Slavic Department, Greece, and other university units are co-sponsoring a symposium to honor our late Slavic Department colleague, Professor Omri Rodan, who passed away unexpectedly last fall. He was an outstanding specialist in the Silver Age and the author of a number of groundbreaking books. I invite all of you to attend the symposium. In the evening of November 1st, the Copernicus Endowment is co-sponsoring a lecture demonstration on Polish Baroque music, featuring members of the Newcomer Baroque Ensemble that will give a concert the following evening. On November the 5th, the Copernicus Endowment and Polish Club are presenting a lecture by UFM Professor of History Brian Porter-Schutz entitled Pilsudski and the Polish Revolution of 1918. Finally, the next Greece Noon lecture on November the 6th will be given by Noah Turker, Central Asian sociocultural analyst with Courage Services. His talk will focus on what is becoming of the Uzbeks, Islam, Uzbek identity, and the search for meaning in contemporary Uzbek independent religious media. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Yelena Asokina, Professor of Russian History at the University of South Carolina. Yelena received her PhD from the Department of History at Moscow State University, my alma mater. She is the author of more than three books. I will list only the most important books. Her first book was published in 1993 in Russian, Hierarchy of Consumption, Life Under the Stalinist Rationing System, 1928-1935. Her second book, which actually was an expansion of the first Russian book, and it was a dramatic expansion and elaboration, was published in English. The title is Our Daily Bread, Socialist Distribution and the Art of Survival in Stalin's Russia, 1927-1941, published again in English in 2001. And she's the author of Gold for Industrialization, Torgsin, published in Russia in 2009, and I believe this book will be translated in English and published at Yale.
Yeah, I'm translating.
Okay, good. Professor Asokina also wrote numerous articles on Russian and Soviet social and economic history. She is currently engaged in a research project, Rembrandts for Tractors, that explores the social, economic, and cultural effects of the Soviet mass art exports under Stalin to finance Soviet industrialization. Yelena is also a recipient of a number of prestigious fellowships: the fellowship from the Kennan Institute, National Endowment for the Humanities, National Gallery of Art, Hoover Institute, Harvard University's Davis Center for Russian Studies, and others. Please join me in welcoming Yelena Asokina to the University of Michigan.
Thank you very much, Olga. I don't need to introduce my research anymore, so I can just go straight to the topic of my presentation today. Thank you very much for coming. I'm delighted to be here, although it feels too cold for me now. Oh my God. What happened? We need the light. Yeah, okay. I'm afraid of falling asleep, you know. Yeah, I now have been for 8 years in South Carolina, and one day when I had to go to Russia, I realized that I didn't have any warm clothes anymore. So it feels cold for me, but I'm adjusting slowly. So thank you very much for coming here. I'm delighted to be here, and I want to share some of the results of my current research. The project that I'm working on right now. I'm finishing the book at the moment. It's not on mass export in general. It's specifically on the export of icons under Stalin, export of religious art, to explore one of the Machiavellian dimensions of Stalinism, when the regime used religious art to finance the communism construction. But today my talk is more general. I'm going to talk about the export of Western art abroad under Stalin, and specifically about the role of Andrew Mellon, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, who bought 21 masterpieces. Why are you laughing? Do you know him? So, who bought 21 masterpieces from the Imperial Museum in Russia? We call it Hermitage, but you call it Hermitage. So I may be using both. So for me, it's more familiar and more comfortable to say Hermitage, but I also can call it Hermitage. And these paintings became the core of the National Gallery of Art. Although you won't learn it when you are in the Gallery of Art, you will see that these paintings came from Mellon, but you will not find out that they used to belong to the Imperial collection in St. Petersburg in Russia. I hope that when you are in the gallery again, you will remember me and this talk, and you will specifically look at those paintings and appreciate the link, the bridge between two cultures, two museums here, the Russian Hermitage and the National Gallery of Art in Washington. But before I tell you this story, actually my plan today is to tell you the story first, and then to show you the paintings at the end, and maybe tell you a little bit about what happened to these paintings here, since I was a scholar at the National Gallery of Art, specifically on the Mellon Fellowship. And at the end, I will show you these paintings and give you more information on them. But I will go with the story first. The first question that we have to answer: why Stalin had to sell art? We all know that the Russian Empire was a very wealthy country. According to the contemporaries, the gold treasury of the Russian Empire on the eve of the First World War amounted to 1.7 billion gold rubles. Gold worth of 1.7 billion rubles. According to the contemporaries, that was the biggest among the world state banks at the time. According to some others, it's second only to the Bank of France. It's true that during the First World War and the Revolution and the Civil War, some of this imperial gold, before the communists took power in Russia in October of 1917, some of this gold was spent by the Tsarist and the provisional government, stolen or lost. It is a detective story because the gold reserve of the Russian Empire actually had trebled during the Civil War. The Bolsheviks moved it to the Volga River to Kazan, trying to move it further from the front line, but this territory was captured by anti-Bolshevik forces, and they then transported this gold reserve to Siberia, where they lost it to Admiral Kolchak. And when Kolchak was defeated, the Bolsheviks recaptured this gold treasury and returned it back to Moscow. So it is a detective story worth of a movie or like a novel, but it's not the topic of my presentation today. My point here is that some of this gold was spent, stolen or lost even before the communists took power. But regardless, when the Bolsheviks took power in Russia, they received also a very tremendous gold treasury. The remaining gold from the imperial gold treasury, about 800 tons of pure gold, or approximately worth 1 billion gold rubles. So that was a pretty handsome amount, not as much as the imperial government had, but pretty impressive. So, however, by the beginning of the 1920s, like only 5 years later, after the Bolsheviks took power, practically nothing remained of this tremendous gold reserve. If you look at this table, you will see that by February 1st, 1922, according to the report on the gold reserve that Lenin ordered to make, the gold that the Bolshevik government has amounted to a little bit over 200 million gold rubles.
It would be easier to see the chart if these lights were not on.
We really are not going to concentrate on this table, but we can turn off light for a while. Okay. All right. Okay. So if you compare the imperial gold reserve, 1.7 billion gold rubles, then the Bolsheviks took power. You look for October 1917, balance as of November 1st, 1917, about 1.1 billion gold rubles. And by the beginning, so this is when the Bolsheviks took power, this is the figure, right? And by the beginning of the 1920s, by 1922, it's only 217 million gold rubles. So the question is, where did all this gold go? Right? And this table explains the expenditures how this gold had been wasted. Some went to pay Germany to escape the First World War when the Bolsheviks signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. Some went to pay the neighboring countries, the Baltic states that were independent at that time. Turkey, according to the friendship agreements with these countries. But the majority, the lion portion of this gold, went to pay trade deficit of Soviet Russia. Russia didn't produce anything at that time. It was ruined by the wars and revolutions, so they had to buy everything abroad. And no one wanted to give them loans or credits, so they had to spend their gold to buy food and goods for the population at that time. Also, a tremendous amount of gold went to support communist and workers' movements in the world in the hope to bring the world revolution about. The hope that had not materialized, but regardless, a lot of gold was wasted to bring this the world revolution about. So what the Bolsheviks had by the beginning of the 1920s were only 200 million gold rubles in gold treasury. By the mid-1920s, they improved the situation, but only slightly. They improved it mostly thanks to the confiscations of church properties, and also because they were able to increase the export of agricultural resources and accumulated some hard currency and gold thanks to it. But what they had by the beginning of the 1920s was only about 300 million gold rubles. So they never reached that 1 billion, let alone 1.7 billion gold rubles that the imperial government had. So when they started their forced industrialization in 1927, they virtually didn't have enough money. I call it industrialization with an empty wallet. So it is a very expensive project because they wanted to focus specifically on the military production, industrial production, heavy industries that required a lot of investments, and they didn't have enough money to go with this project. Regardless, they decided they didn't want to wait because they believed that war was behind the corner and they wanted to be prepared to fight. So with the beginning of this of the forced industrialization, their gold reserves began to dwindle very, very quickly. And if you look at the second table, the last one that I'm going to show you today, I'm a socioeconomic historian, but I'm not heavy on numbers today. Right. So if you look, you will see how that gold that they were able to accumulate by the mid-1920s very quickly dwindled, disappeared. In October 1926, before the forced industrialization started, they had about 250 million gold rubles. And by September of 1928, what was remained was only 130 million gold rubles. And this amount was not even enough to pay the next year trade deficit that the country had at that time. So technically, the gold reserve was negative. They didn't have anything. Whatever they had would go to pay their trade deficit next year. So that was a big question, how to finance industrialization. And we even might ask, were they crazy to start such an expensive project without having any means to support it? Their major hope was to be able to finance industrialization through the export of agricultural resources. They believed that they would be able to collect grain and other foodstuffs from peasants and sell it on world market and accumulate gold and currency to finance the industrialization. But they were unlucky because we all know what happened in 1929, right, in New York. The stock market crashed and the Great Depression began. Prices for agricultural resources dropped, while prices for the industrial goods increased. And in this situation, they were not able to receive from the exports to receive revenues enough to finance the industrialization program. Another possible source for them to finance industrialization was gold mining. However, during the wars and revolutions, the Russian pre-revolutionary gold mining industry collapsed. It had collapsed. It didn't produce much. By the beginning of the 1930s, it produced about 30 tons of pure gold a year. 30 tons, which was a half of what Imperial Russia produced in 1913, the last year before the First World War. So Stalin began to pay his attention to gold mining industry very late, only in 1928. It's paradoxical that they should have thought about it much earlier, but they began to build the industry, gold mining industry, only in 1928. So they could not rely on this source of gold. As far as the Gulag, the concentration camps that also were involved in gold mining industry, it was called Dalstroy, the specific branch that was involved in gold mining. It had yet to make its appearance. As a matter of fact, it began operating only in 1932, and I already said that the industrialization started in 1927. And the toughest, the most difficult year was 1931, the highest import spendings and very little gold reserves. So Dalstroy began to operate only in 1932. And that year it produced only half a ton of pure gold, which of course was absolutely insufficient to finance industrialization. So the situation was desperate. They started this project, industrial project. They didn't want to wait. They didn't want to slow down because they believed that the regime and the survival of the regime depended on how quickly they would be able to industrialize, and they virtually didn't have money to finance it. So they panicked. The government panicked. They began to feverishly look for gold and currency. They began to collect gold from the population through the state hard currency stores during the famine. The stores were called Tarksin, and I actually dedicated the whole book, 600 pages, to tell the story of Tarksin that financed industrialization through people's heirlooms, by people's heirlooms, and also became one of the major strategies of survival for the people at that time. But they also began to sell art to finance industrialization. And now it's clear why they had to do it. That was not an act of strength. That was an act of despair. They, as I said, they panic. And this mass art expert actually shows us this desperate attempt to survive under the conditions of that historical period. So they didn't start with selling, and we're done with the tables, now it's just the story. So they didn't start with the export of masterpieces. They believed that they would be okay. They could do it only just with so-called secondary items. Right. However, once again, because of the Great Depression, the art market was very bad. People barely had money to live on for bread. No one wanted to buy secondary, the secondary rate antique. Right? Maybe they wanted, but they didn't have any means to do it. So the Bolsheviks were not able to finance the industrialization through this ordinary antiques. However, the industrial plants increased, they grew, and this is when they decided to shift from the export of ordinary antique to the export of masterpieces from the best Russian museums. It happened during the summer of 1928 when they shifted to the mass export of the best work of art from the museums. And it continued approximately until 1933. So that was a rather long period, about 4 years, when they were damaging the collections, the art museum collections. That was not only paintings. They exported art by literally thousands of tons. It's not only those 21 paintings that Mellon bought. Thousands of tons. It included porcelain, furniture, manuscripts, books, jewelry, coins, and of course paintings, sculptures. Because the market, art market, was interested only in Western art, they could not sell Russian art or icons to receive the revenue that they desired. So this is why the most damage fell on the museums of Western art, and the best among them was the Hermitage in Leningrad, former St. Petersburg. So it suffered the most and the first. Let's now see and talk a little bit about Mellon and his role. The Soviet government at that time was ready to sell everything. That was a matter of price. They were ready to sell the entire Hermitage only if the price offered would be good, right? But they didn't want to sell at any price. They negotiated. They tried to receive the highest prices possible in those conditions of the Great Depression and depressed art market. There are stories and cases when many deals fell through because buyers were not generous enough. One of these stories, as a matter of fact, there were 2 rounds of negotiations with a very famous art dealer of that time, a British guy, Joseph Dubin. And he was one of the first to negotiate with the Soviet government, but he offered a ridiculous price of $5 million for 40 best masterpieces from the Hermitage, including 2 Leonardo da Vinci's, 2 Raphaels, a lot of Rembrandts, Botticelli, you name it, right? The sour cream of the Hermitage, like the best 40 paintings only for $5 million. And the Soviet government, of course, rejected this offer, which shows that they were ready to sell, but not at any price. They wanted to receive the best price. Very often they negotiated the same masterpieces on several fronts, sometimes on 3 fronts. They negotiated with Mellon, they negotiated with Dubin, and they negotiated with another big buyer, Kaluz Gulbekhan. Kaluz Gulbekhan is a very interesting person here. He was called Mr. 5%. He was a founder of Iraq Petroleum, and 5% was his share. He was a wealthy guy of like a very mixed ethnic belonging. He was Armenian by his blood. I think he was born in Turkey. He was a British citizen. He lived in Paris, and he left his collection to Portugal. So he was among the major clients. He was the first major client of the Soviet government. He began to buy from the Hermitage, but he lost his privilege of being the monopolist and the first buyer of the masterpieces because he was not generous enough. He lost to Mellon because Mellon offered better prices. And everything, after all I have said, everything pointed to that the fate of the masterpieces at that time depended on whether a person, a passionate collector with money, would emerge. And very unfortunate for Russia and for the Russian Museum, such a collector emerged, appeared. Andrew Mellon, the U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, a businessman, a banker's son, but also a collector of Western art, one of the founders of the National Gallery of Art. Mellon won because he offered the best prices. To find such a client, somebody who would pay millions, Mellon paid more than $7 million for 21 masterpieces that he bought. To find such a client who would be willing and capable of paying millions for art at the time was very difficult during the Great Depression. Many collectors would like to have these masterpieces, but they didn't have cash. Right? According to contemporaries, at that time, stockbrokers threw themselves out of windows, and corporations' presidents sold apples on the streets. So that was very difficult to find somebody with cash. It was very difficult to get loans and cash from banks, as a matter of fact, as well. So that was misfortune for the Russians that Mellon had money and was interested in buying this art. And because of this deal, 21 masterpieces lost their home in St. Petersburg, in Leningrad at that time, and they found their new home here in the United States. Among this work of art were 2 Raphaels, 5 Rembrandts, 1 Velázquez, although it's not attributed to Velázquez anymore. I'm going to say a few words about it at the end. 1 Botticelli, 1 Veronese, several Van Dycks, 1 Chardin, 1 Eyck, Perugino, Titian, Hals. So all, I'm sure that you know these names. On the best artists of Western art. So if Mellon did not offer his millions to the Soviet government, I'm very confident that the best masterpieces among those that were sold to him would have remained in Russia. They would have been still hanging on the walls of the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. Why I think so? Because, as I said, there was not that easy to find a person with millions in cash at that time. The second thing, the window of this opportunity to buy this art was very narrow. It's only a few years, right? By the mid of the 1930s, the situation with the gold treasury in the Soviet Union improved, and the mass export of art ceased. So they had to find somebody within these 4 years, and that was the most difficult time in the West for the people. So that's why I believe that if Mellon did not offer these millions, then the paintings would have still been in Russia. On the other hand, if Mellon offered more, he could have bought all the masterpieces from the Hermitage. He could have bought all Leonardo da Vinci that the Hermitage has, the only Giorgione that the Hermitage has. So he could have bought everything what he wanted. But he hesitated. There was specifically a deal that fell through. The negotiations took place in London in May 1931. They negotiated 3 jewels of the Hermitage paintings, Benoit Madonna and Madonna Lita by Leonardo da Vinci, and Judith by Giorgione. So they are pearls of the Hermitage collection. The Soviet government wanted 700,000 pounds for these three masterpieces. And Mellon was ready to pay only 390,000. So he showed a certain narrow-mindedness. And the former director of the National Gallery of Art, John Walker, never forgave Mellon for this narrow-mindedness. In his book, Self-Portrait with Donors, Walker in particular wrote that Mellon did not fully understand that he was bargaining for art that did not have any match in the stocks of any art dealer in the world at that time. And that it broke Walker's heart to think that if the negotiations with the Soviet government went through to the end, the National Art Gallery today would have 4 Leonardo da Vinci and 3 Giorgione, an achievement that only the Louvre could challenge. So we see that Mellon bought a lot, but he used this chance, this rare opportunity, but at the same time he also missed this opportunity to buy, as a matter of fact, all the masterpieces from the Hermitage. So the National Gallery of Art in Washington failed to outshine the Louvre because of Mellon's narrow-mindedness. But Andrew Mellon definitely deserves recognition as a patron of art who showed what a man with money could do for his country, for his nation. Mellon left to the American nation 125 paintings, including 21 from the Hermitage, 23 sculptures, and the money to build a marble art gallery. His collection became a core of the National Gallery of Art, and many wealthy Americans with collections followed Mellon's example by donating their collections to the National Gallery of Art. What is interesting, Mellon insisted that neither the gallery nor his collection would be named after him. So he was not selfish on this matter. So what Mellon did for the American nation is similar to what, for example, Pavel Tretyakov did for Russia. Pavel Tretyakov was a merchant before the revolution in Russia, and he collected Russian art. According to his will, he donated his beautiful collection of Russian art to the city of Moscow, and now we have the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow, which is named after him, the best art collection of Russian art. Another example here also, Dmitry Tatishev, who was an ambassador, Russian ambassador in Europe during the first half of the 19th century under Alexander I, Romanov, and he bought about 300 paintings in Europe. When he heard about like a bankruptcy, some wealthy family was selling the art, he would rush there and buy everything, and he donated his collection to the Imperial Hermitage in St. Petersburg. By the way, one of the pearls of his collection, the so-called Tatishev diptych, I will show it at the end, by Van Eyck, an artist of the 14th century, was also sold. Russia at the time had 3 Van Eycks, the Annunciation and the diptych, the Crucifixion and the Last Judgment, and all 3 were sold, and now Russia has no work by this master. So we have grounds to believe that Mellon also financed the sale of the Tatishev diptych, which went not to the National Gallery of Art, but went to the Metropolitan Museum. And you can see this diptych now in the Metropolitan Museum. I will show it when I show the pictures. All right. So a few words about Andrew Mellon. I'm sure that you might know about him, but this is just a part of my presentation today. So as I said, he was a banker's son from Pittsburgh, but he was not an art expert. He remained an amateur, or we can say dilettante, Sometimes he could not remember the names of the artists whose paintings he enjoyed. And his taste was educated by the dealers like Joseph Duvin from Europe, who made like a fortune by a very simple discovery that Europe was rich in art and America was rich in money. So what they did, they just introduced old masters to the new world, and they made their fortune by doing this. So Mellon was not happy in his family life. It didn't go very well, and it will not be a big exaggeration to say that collecting of art became his private life. He was short-spoken and not very social. According to a contemporary, Mellon looked like an accountant dealing in a double-entry bookkeeping, afraid of losing his job, always exhausted by constant worries and tired. Mellon found rest and comfort in being surrounded by his collection. There is much truth in Duvin's words that being the Secretary of Treasury was secondary for Mellon, while collecting was the primary. However, when Mellon financed this Operation Hermitage in 1931 through 1933, we have reasons to believe that he was not already buying for himself. By the end of this deal, he was already 76 years old. He was interested to be connected with something that he believed is eternal. Right? So, and he admitted it himself. To answer the question about why he was buying paintings, Mellon once said that every person wanted to connect his life with something he believed was eternal. Other facts actually prove this point, that he was not buying only for himself at that time, that he already had this idea to give this collection to a National Gallery of Art to be, because it didn't exist yet at that time, because what he bought actually went against his personal taste. He did not like dark paintings, and all Rembrandts that he bought are dark. He did not like sinister faces. In one of the paintings that was attributed to Velázquez, the Pope Innocent X has a sinister face, in my opinion. He wouldn't buy for himself paintings with naked bodies, but he bought Titian, Venus in front of mirror. So definitely he was not only buying for himself, he had this idea already to donate his collection to a National Gallery of Art to be. I would say that Impressionists would match his taste better, because what he was trying to find in art was relaxation and comfort, but the Impressionists were too young for him. We are talking about the 1930s, right? And Mellon, being a businessman, he wanted to invest in the art that had been tested by time, and he worried only about the authenticity of paintings and eminent masters. What is interesting, in Mellon we have like two, how much time I have left?
Ideally by one, but you can go.
Okay. All right. So in Mellon we have actually two persons, Mellon the collector and Mellon the statesman or businessman, right? But I can say that they never interfered with each other. So the Mellon collector never tried to influence the Mellon the Secretary of Treasury, and the Mellon the Secretary never tried to help Mellon the collector. Why I say so? Mellon, being in the American administration, could have helped the Soviet Union with the export of raw materials, because we know that he was responsible to supervise or to implement the congressional decision to protect the national economy from the dumping of cheap Soviet goods and raw materials. So it depended on him to impose an embargo on these raw materials or not. And Stalin would not mind to have Mellon as his person in the American administration and offer him at a very good price some masterpieces from the Hermitage in exchange for this help with the Soviet export. Right? And there were precedents of such exchange. Kalyuz-Gulbenkian, that I have already mentioned earlier, helped the Soviet Union with dumping Soviet cheap oil on the world market because, as I said, he was a founder of Iraq petroleum. He had connections. He could influence the market. So through him, the Soviet Union was able to dump cheap oil on the on the world market. In exchange, they allowed him to buy the Hermitage masterpieces rather cheap. So the situation could have been similar with Mellon. In exchange for his assistance with not imposing embargoes, right? The Soviet Union could offer him a better art deal. However, as I said, he never gave this opportunity to the Soviets, and as a collector, he never tried to influence himself as the Secretary of Treasury. As a matter of fact, he had never been to the Soviet Union, and he did not conduct the negotiations himself. He bought paintings based on a catalog that was published in Paris in 1909, and the negotiations were done through three firms, intermediary firms, one located in Berlin, the second in London, and the third in New York. So there was a long chain. The Soviet government did not know for a very long time that they were selling to Mellon. And when rumors spread about Mellon's purchases, and it was published in world press, they refused to admit it, even not to the public, but they refused to admit it even in their secret correspondence to each other. Because what was harmful for them, in their opinion, that they did not sell directly to the buyer, that they wasted some money by paying the intermediary firms. And those people who conducted negotiation, actually, as a matter of fact, according to their memoirs, were afraid that they could be executed for allowing the intermediary firms to get rich. So they pretty much wasted this money. The Soviet Union paid to middlemen instead of maybe saving money for itself. So, but when the Soviets finally admitted that they were selling to Mellon, they immediately sent their agents to New York. And I believe, I don't have any documents to prove that, but I believe that the goal was to meet Mellon in person and maybe to offer him a deal. This two person was the head of the Trade Office of Antiquariat, Nikolai Ilyin. Office of Antiquariat was in charge with mass export of art, and the second person was from the People's Commissariat of Trade, Boris Graevsky. Their business cards are still kept in the National Gallery of Art archive. You can find them. So what they brought themselves, and they carried it in their luggage. Just think about it. Listen, they were carrying with them the Crucifixion by Perugino, a rather big painting, Venus in front of mirror by Titian, also a very big painting, and Alba Madonna by Raphael. These two persons, they were carrying these three masterpieces, the world masterpieces, in their luggage to New York to see Mellon and maybe to offer him a deal, because they already knew who was the client, right? However, he refused to see them, and they just left these paintings with another firm that was one of the middleman firms in this negotiation. So Mellon was a perfect client because, as I said, he was very silent, not social. To call him laconic was like accusing him of being a chatterbox. Right? So he kept silent, especially so because that was the Great Depression. As I said, people didn't have money to buy food, and if they knew that the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States spent $7 million when they pretty much were starving, that would probably won't be a good publicity. But at the same time, he did, as I said, he did a very good job, and his contribution, his gift to the nation is tremendous because of this. So with the client like Mellon, the Soviet government was safe because they tried to keep those sales in secret. They negotiated in secret. So they could always say that those paintings that were missing from the walls of the Hermitage were sent to Magnitogorsk or another Siberian city to educate the workers at the socialist construction site, and Mellon only had like pitiful copies, right? So, but Mellon's silence Mellon's silence was over when the Democrats came to office. I think it's 1933. After three Republican governors, then Roosevelt came to the office, right? As far as I know. And this is when the administration had changed, and Mellon was accused of tax evasion. What is interesting here, but that the point of accusation was exactly the Hermitage paintings that he bought, because he deducted their value from his tax income on the pretext that he was giving them to a charitable foundation. And he intended to give it to a National Gallery of Art, but he actually did not give them yet. Yeah. So a trial began, a long trial that ended only after Mellon wrote a letter to President Roosevelt where he said, I'm giving this collection to the American nation, and then trial was over. So during this trial, Duveen actually was invited to give testimonies, and he actually said during this trial, Duveen said that Mellon's collection was the best private one in the world, and that because of these purchases, Hermitage was no longer the greatest collection in the world. It has gone to pieces. I do not see, he added, how a nation could sell their great pictures of that kind. In my opinion, it is an exaggeration. The Hermitage is still one of the best world museums, and but of course the damage was very substantial that was done to the museum by those sales. So while Mellon the collector was buying paintings, Mellon the official was imposing an embargo on the import of cheap Soviet matches, asbestos, and lumber. It is true that in February 1931, Mellon refused to impose an embargo on the import of Soviet manganese, but this decision was made in the interest of Mellon, the steel industrialist, rather than in Stalin's interest. So he also minded his own business, his industrial interests. So Mellon got the Hermitage masterpieces because he paid prices that set records during the Great Depression. And yet, these prices were ridiculously low, because we are talking about artwork that is priceless. And of course, if the National Gallery of Art decides to sell them now, they would be able to receive a much bigger price for them. Yeah, the market is good, but of course they will not. Right. So Mellon's, and this is the final conclusions of my presentation today. So the sales to Mellon was just one page in the history of Stalin's mass export of art. As I said, they sold art by thousands of tons. How much money were they able to receive? Not much. The preliminary calculations show that they received about $20 million. And it's trying to finance industrialization with $20 million. It's like trying to stop a flood with your finger, right? You can't do it. But of course, it was just one of many financial sources. You have to add a lot. You have to add Gulag with free prisoners, labor. You have to add Tarxine stores as hard currency stores, export of grain. So altogether, they were able to gain enough gold to debts that they accumulated during the initial stage of their forced industrialization. In kind of to illustrate that it was very little what they received from the art export, I can say that from those hard currency stores called Tarxin, they received $150 million. US dollars of the 1930s capacity, purchasing capacity. We're not talking about the dollars of these days. so $20 million from the masterpieces in comparison to $150 million that they received from the Soviet people. And what the Soviet people brought to Tarxin was just simple things, gold crosses, very simple rings, wedding rings, earrings, like small big gold objects, jewelry. So no comparison when you see like the historical and artistic damage. The damage that was caused to the Russian museums was very, very substantial. So rumors say when the paintings arrived to New York, Mellon locked himself in with those paintings and spent hours there enjoying them. But unfortunately, he did not have much time left. On the 27th of August of 1937, he died. And as his will required, his collection went to the National Gallery. So Mellon's capital served America well. What about Russia? At the beginning of the 20th century, the Hermitage had the chance to become maybe the best world collection. Why? Because it not only had the imperial collection of art that was collected by the Romanovs, by the rulers of Russia, but it also became a storage for almost all the nationalized private collections in the Russian Empire. So everything that was captured by the Bolsheviks, nationalized from the palaces, private mansions, private collections, was brought to the Hermitage. And with all these sources, the Hermitage had this chance to become the best world museum. However, Stalin's art sales, which went on for 4 years, undermined the Hermitage might. But we can always say that no other museum in the world would be able to sustain such a long-term abuse and still remain among the world best. And of course, what I want to add here, what is important that these masterpieces are not lost. They are in a very good museum, in good hands, and I had this chance to see it for myself because I worked in the National Gallery of Art with the files. This is important. And the conditions in the National Gallery of Art at that time were much better than in the Hermitage, the storage condition. So we have a lot of inspections that actually show how art was storage in the Hermitage in those days. There was a lot of damage done to the paintings because it was piled on each other. It was all, how to say it, the Hermitage was stuffed with paintings. Right, so this is important, and now when Russia is open and the Russians can travel, they can go and see those paintings in the National Gallery of Art. And by the way, I'm closer to them than I'm closer to St. Petersburg nowadays. I remember just one personal story. When I was in National Gallery of Art on a fellowship, I sat in a little park nearby, and there was a Russian guy next to me, and he heard me speaking Russian on the phone, and he began to talk to me, and he happened to be a pilot of Aeroflot, like having some time off. And we were just next to the National Gallery and asking, do you know that the gallery has painting from the Hermitage? And he said, no, I don't. And let's go, I will give you my own tour. And I showed him one of the paintings that used to belong to Russia, that used to be in St. Petersburg, and he was amazed because it's still like it is a blank even page for an average Russian. They don't know about it. And I'm sure that an average American doesn't know about it either. All right, okay guys, so now the dessert, right? The paintings. Yeah. First of all, I want to say that pretty much all of them were restored. Some of them went a very long restoration, like Van Eyck, like 2-year restoration, so they are in good shape. Many of them were reattributed to authors in the centuries. I'm going just to give you the most fascinating stories from what I discovered. So let's start. Let's start with Rembrandts. All right. Mellon bought 5 Rembrandts. Only one now is attributed to Rembrandt himself. We'll start with this one, which is called the portrait of like a man in a Turk costume. What is interesting about it? When in the gallery of National Gallery of Art, they made X-rays. They came to the conclusion that only the lower part of this painting, the hand and the lower part of the torso, belongs to Rembrandt. Very ironically, because this is the unfinished part. This painting is unfinished, and this is the unfinished part. You can see that no details here, but it gave an idea to scholars how Rembrandt actually worked. He was a businessman of his time. He had his workshop, and what he normally did, he would make a sketch and let his assistants in his workshop to finish it. So with this painting, his assistants finished the rest of the painting, but this part remained unfinished, and very ironical, this is exactly what belongs to Rembrandt himself. So for three other paintings, and one was an exception. Like this one, a portrait of a woman holding a pink flower. This one is this painting is called Joseph accused by Potiphar's wife. Also, it was attributed to Rembrandt at that time, and this a girl with a broom. They're now attributed to Rembrandt's workshop. And as I said, by studying with X-rays, by studying these paintings, scholars in the National Gallery of Art now understood how Rembrandt worked and what kind of artist and also entrepreneurial person he was at the time. So it's not only true for those paintings by Rembrandt that Mellon bought. I can tell you that during the last decade, more than 100 paintings in the best world museums that was attributed to Rembrandt lost now his authority, right? Now they are attributed either to his circle or to his workshop. The only painting which is still attributed to Rembrandt is this one, a Polish nobleman. This is the beautiful painting, and with no question is Rembrandt. However, historians don't know who is the person on the painting. There are debates. Some say Rembrandt himself. Others say this is his brother. Others believe this Jan Sobieski or even Stefan Batory, or like a Polish ambassador, Andrzej Ray. So there are debates. They actually don't know, or maybe some not real person, or a fruit of imagination, right? So, but as far as work, this is Rembrandt's work. The only one which is still attributed to Rembrandt. The jewels, of course, were 2 Raphaels. I'll show them you. This one is Madonna Alba, a rather big painting named after one of the former owners. And the other one is St. George and the Dragon, a smaller painting. So they are the beautiful work of art at the beginning of the 15th century. The best. The Hermitage, since 1993, begged to bring these paintings to Russia to show them to the Russians in Leningrad, in St. Petersburg. But only in 2002 this actually happened. And the National Gallery of Art finally decided, I guess they were scared that these paintings would not come back. So in 2002, they finally brought these two paintings by Raphael to the Hermitage. And we only can imagine the feelings of the curators of the Hermitage when they saw these paintings and realized what their museum lost. Right? Because they are Raphael's, no one questions this. Beautiful paintings. By the way, no one asked curators whether they would like to sell this art or not. The decisions in the Soviet Union in the 1930s were made in the Politburo, like a group of about 10 men at the top of the political hierarchy. They made decisions on the sale of the masterpieces from the museums. Their decisions depended on the price offered on them. So we know personal stories when the curators of the Hermitage, who took it as their personal tragedy, the loss of this painting, they locked themselves in with this painting. So they pretended they lost keys, they couldn't. So, but of course you could not do anything when Stalin and the Politburo made this decision, so it would be implemented. We have memoirs that describe how it was done. A person would receive an order to stay after hours in the museum, to take a painting from the walls of the Hermitage, and personally transported to bring it to the Office of Antiquariat, which was conveniently located in the Hermitage. So the trade office that was selling my art was located within the museum, within the Hermitage itself. So a few more examples, and I guess I will just maybe go a little faster. These paintings, but Van Dyck, I'll just show them. Several of them were sold as Rubens, but they now attributed to Van Dyck. Van Dyck was a Rubens student, and obviously they have something in common because of this. So Van Dyck's in the National Gallery of Art, right, that Mellon bought. The crucifixion by Perugino. This is just pictures. They're interesting pictures. This, by the way, the Kaluz Gulbakan with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Right. That was Mellon. This picture, Mellon did not buy it. It's, as a matter of fact, in the Art Museum in Philadelphia, also from the Hermitage, and it's hanging in the original frame with the name in Cyrillic, the birth of Venus by Poussin. Right, I guess in order not to mix it, Mellon's purchases with others, I probably have to just to show it one by one. All right, this one is. This is Veronese, the Finding of Moses. Mellon's purchase now in the National Gallery of Art. This one, which is called Henry, Duke of Gloucester. As a matter of fact, it was sold as Van Dyck, but now it's attributed to Honeyman. And now they believe this is this is Henry, Duke of Gloucester, but it was sold as William of Orange. So they even changed the personality of the subject of this painting. All right. So what else? Botticelli, the Adoration of the Magi. Mellon's purchase in the National Gallery of Art. What am I missing? Two works by Hals. And one more, this one. One of my favorites, a very, where is it? The House of Cards by Chardin. Also, Mellon's purchase. This one, that was my favorite, and I was so disappointed. It was sold as Velasquez, Pope Innocent X. But now it's attributed to the Circle of Velasquez, and I still don't believe it because, in my opinion, it's so impressive. And but the X-rays showed that it's not masterful enough. The brush stroke is not very masterful, in their opinion. When I worked with the files in the National Gallery of Art, I found a letter a person wrote, and he was frustrated as myself. He said, "No, you are not right. Just look at it. It's Velasquez. It's a true master. Look at this face." So it's very energetic, so impressive. So people refuse to believe this new attribution, but this is what scholars say, that it's not Velasquez. Circle of Velasquez at the best. This one, Van Eyck, that I told you that Mellon purchased for his collection, and this is in the National Gallery of Art, the Annunciation, and by the same master, the diptych, the Tishif diptych, which is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art nowadays. This one. The Crucifixion and the Last Judgment. Well, we believe that Mellon financed this deal as well, but in 1933, it went to the Metropolitan Museum from the Hermitage. And I think I will finish with the last story and show you the Titian, Venus in front of mirror. What is interesting about this painting, that X-rays in the National Gallery of Art at the beginning of the 1970s showed that there are two more paintings under this painting that we can see. So Titian pretty much recycled one of his work. I'll show you the X-rays, and it will help to kind of to see what I mean here. So this is the X-rays. Venus head, just oriented. This is a Venus head, right? You see. So nowadays the painting is vertical, but originally it was horizontal, and that was a double portrait, female and male, man and woman, right? So it looks like the clients who ordered it did not pay for this, or he couldn't sell it. So Titian decided to recycle the canvas. So he turned it vertically, and his second painting was Venus, but he painted her in a tunic, so her body was covered. Then he looked at this, gave it a thought, and obviously decided she's a goddess. I can't hide her body, right? She's perfect. I have to show her as she is. So the final version that we see now is we see the naked body. However, to economize, he used some parts of the original paintings, the drapery of the man's costume. Obviously, Titian was very happy how he made velvet and fur on this drapery. So he used this part of the original painting to have a cover for Venus, like a drapery. And I'll show it to you in a minute. So this part, you can see this drapery, this comes from the man's costume. But they were able to discover it, and that was a sensation at the beginning of the 1970s when they discovered it. But only the use of X-rays allowed kind of to discover the secret of this painting, to see how the master worked and what is hiding underneath. All right, guys, I have to stop here. Of course, I can go endlessly. Yeah.
Okay.